in a sense, it's putting cart before horse, but I think that, and I thought you were going to go the other way. What was going to happen to the Republican Party? What would they do? Would they pull back and try to become a little more the moderate conservative
Well, I would
party?
like to hope for that.
Me too.
I
I would also like to see pigs fly, but, yeah.
I have a question by proxy from my dad, and he's wondering.
So who's your dad?
George Heifel, you know him.
Okay.
So he's wondering why the sales tax isn't a bigger issue in the governor's campaign, especially the sales tax on food, which he believes is the second highest in the country after Mississippi.
Right, right. Randy, we're chasing Mississippi. We'll get there. We'll get there. It's a great question, and if I were Paul Davis, I would have some kind of proposal about that, to tell you the truth. I think, I come from Pennsylvania, I grew up in Pennsylvania, a fairly high sales tax, no sales tax on food, no sales tax on clothing. But food has always just struck me as abhorrent. And Brownback has taken off the tax credits, so it's even worse now. So I think that in a lot of ways, for one thing, he'd have to. The next question out of the reporter's mouth after that proposal would be, where are you going to get the revenue? So I don't think he wants to stir up that hornet's nest, number one. Number two, he really wants to focus back on the tax revenues, which are plunging now, and the implications for education. So when you hear people talk, when you hear him talk about the budget, almost always the next sentence will be, here's the impact on education. He wants to bring things back to education time and time and time again. I think he wants to do that for policy reasons, but I also think he wants to do it for political reasons, because that has pulled extremely well. On policy grounds, I totally agree with you. I'd be willing to have a slight increase in the overall sales tax and do away with the sales tax on food. But that should have been a big issue long ago. And I got to say that you've had Democratic administrations who never really, pressed that at all.
Right.
So I don't think this is just a Republican-Democratic issue at all. They look at their revenues and they go, oh, geez, we can't. Well, just as with expanding Medicaid, there are financial and fiscal issues, but there are also moral issues involved. Yeah.
Does it mean, Dilly Squat, that 100 or whatever it is, moderate Republicans sign on to support Davis?
Yes.
Does that mean?
Yes. A couple of things. First of all, it got Kansas extensive press coverage.
Right.
That's number one, which is very, very, very important. But national, it was one of the things that popped Kansas onto the national agenda a little bit. Obviously, one of those people, Jan Myers, either did or didn't sign on. The stories I've heard that she was signed on to this women's group, and they assumed that she was okay with this, or that she signed on and then came under immense pressure to take her name off. That has faded, you might note. And the fact that you have 103 Republicans, ex-Republican legislators or office holders or party officials, that has stayed. And I think you're going to see, in parts of the state, you're going to see either local TV ads or mailers or whatever with Steve Morris, with Dick Bond, with Davis. And so I think that the group was important, but I also think they're going to localize that with media. So I was somewhat skeptical, to tell you the truth, but it's been significant. And I know, being a pretty good friend of Wint Winter, he's really gotten a lot of attention on this. And I think personally, he did a good job both of putting that together, which is pretty much that was his baby. And secondly, I think he's done a good job of being the front man without being, too much of himself. So, yeah.
Will recent events in Iraq and our getting back in have any influence one way or another on the Kansas election?
The only place it would, I think, possibly would be in the Roberts race. That's the only place where you'd have that kind of a, and it's relevant because Pat Roberts was the head of the Intelligence Committee under George W. Bush. If I were Pat Roberts, I would not want to bring up my record on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He did not cover himself with glory. He swept a lot of stuff under the rug. Obviously, people think that there were a lot of mistakes made in that. So my guess is, and war issues, unless you're at war, foreign policy issues just don't make much of a difference, even in a Senate race. So I don't think that'll be any part of it, honestly. Yeah.
Yes, there's a TV ad for Brownback that I see several times a day. And
I'm sorry.
it claims that he's increased the funding for education and that many more teachers have been hired. Are these lies?
Apples and oranges.
Lies, damn lies, and statistics. Name of a famous book. There's more, if you broadly define, there's more money going to education. That's almost all accounted for, first to a part by capital expenditures, but mostly money going to CAPERS, pension funding. So that is not, the money is not going to the classroom at all. It's going, you know, and now they need to, now to Brownback's credit, he has done better funding of CAPERS, which everybody needs. And boy, if you want to blame both Democrats and Republicans over the last 30 or 40 years,
Yep.
CAPERS is, you know, Exhibit A.
That's a retirement fund.
Yes, yes, and it's, you know, it's getting better. It's on a better path. So, but that's not money going to the classroom. And if you look at per pupil expenditures, it's down about $400 or $500 from 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So it's never recovered from the recession. On teachers, you get into the weeds on counting teachers, and you want getting the weeds on counting jobs and stuff like that, and everybody cherry picks some numbers. There's some, you know, I would just go back to Dwayne Gosen, I'd go back to Ed Flengy. I posted something on Facebook yesterday about the Kansas economy versus the national economy. Clearly shows the Kansas economy not doing this as well. When you start counting teachers, counting jobs, everybody has their own, picks their own statistics, has their own narrative. By and large, I think the judgment has been made on the Kansas economy, and it's not doing especially well. It's not dying or anything, but there's been no shot of adrenaline. The experiment has not succeeded. As what economist, aside from Arthur Laffer, thought it would succeed?
Right.
Nobody thought it would succeed. And so, in a sense, they're really, I mean, Brownback, if he wants someone to blame for the position he's in, he has to blame himself. First of all, for taking the positions that most people thought wouldn't work. And secondly, being so public about his expectations. Yeah.
Yes, would you like to make a comment about the other statewide races, insurance commissioner?
You know, insurance commissioner, you got Sandy Prager today, the Republican, endorsing Dennis Anderson, who is probably the better qualified than Ken Seltzer. I think you get far down the ballot, and you're going to get a lot of Republicans who say, "Oh my God, I voted Democratic here and there, maybe even there. I can't vote for any more Democrats." I think it's really hard, and you're going to, as you go down the ballot, you're going to, in the first race, you got the Senate race, then the House, then the governor's race, then the Attorney General's race. Well, Derek Schmidt will win the Attorney General's race going away, you know. And so they would have voted Republican. Now you got to go back on Secretary of State's race. You know, I think as you go down the ballot, the R behind the name is simply going to be more assertive. I don't think that means that you couldn't win, or that the insurance commissioner couldn't win. But it gets the farther down you go, the harder it gets. Yeah, Steve?
If you were Brownback's campaign manager, what successful strategy would you suggest to him?
You know, Luckily, I'm not. What's been fascinating about Brownbacks is to look at his ads. And there are two kinds. There's the, we've been successful when in fact you can take those ads apart pretty quickly. And Davis has and other people have. And then there's the other ads. You know, Paul Davis, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama. And, you know, 2010, that worked like a charm. There were county commission races in Leavenworth County that were decided on Obamacare. I'm not making this up. All kinds of Kansas House races in 2010 and Senate races in 2012 were decided on opposition to Obama and Obamacare. I look around in Kansas and I look around nationally. And first of all, Obamacare seems to be working remarkably. And I think I think there's probably, particularly at the state level, in governor's races, Senate race you can make a little more connection. Because now the governor's race, here's Paul Davis sitting in Lawrence, Kansas. He has nothing to do. I mean, he was an Obama delegate. Everybody knows that. But you know, he's been trying to mind the shop in Kansas. So I don't think those are working, and the best evidence for that is that Sam Brownback in the polls is stuck at 40%. And he spent had spent on his behalf a couple $1 million so far. Paul Davis has spent very, very little. Somebody's been spent on his behalf by the Kansas Values Institute, but he hasn't spent much money yet at all. Republican Governors Association has been coming in with big money. The Democratic Governors Association, if anybody of you know people at the Democratic Governors Association, just by chance, you might call them and say, why aren't you spending money in Kansas? Now, maybe Paul doesn't even want them to spend money right now. I don't know. But I think that, I mean, you either got to go really negative on Paul or tout your achievements. The final thing I'd say about that is that last week, or a few days ago, the Brownback campaign raised this issue about the Education Commission. And John Vrattle. Okay, John Vrattle said something absolutely unexceptional that everybody else in this room was, you know, there are issues about consolidation, there are pressures to consolidate, blah, 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 blah. And the Brownback administration took those completely out of context, tried to raise this as a campaign issue. If that's the best you've got, you don't have anything. Because first of all, it's shot down almost immediately. Secondly, Brownback's own commission today says, is talking about incentives to consolidate. I think a big problem here for both Roberts and Brownback is that they didn't see it coming, and B, they really don't know quite what to do about it once it's here. Now, Roberts has got, you know, gunslingers coming in from Washington, from the consultants, and he will attack Orman and create a record for Orman, and that's what he's doing what I'd recommend. But I think Brownback must go back at night and say, you know, what's going to stick. The final thing I'd say, it's 5 after 1. I've talked long enough. The final thing I'd say is about Paul Davis. Paul Davis has run a very good campaign. He's gotten better and better as a speaker. His debate performance was really quite good. Closing statement was excellent. Brownback was like, I'm proud to be a Kansan. Davis was very good. But I think more interesting is his campaign commercials. Yes. That with Davis, first look at the horn rim glasses. You can't, how do you demonize someone in the horn rim glasses? He's as straight arrow as you get. He's got a lovely wife, kid, blah, blah, blah. But he comes off as very sincere, 90% sincere, and then there's a 10% irony, snark, just a little bit. And basically saying, are you kidding me? And I mean, I really go for it. And he's not over the top, and Paul Davis would never be over the top. But, and you've got the car driving backwards.
Yeah.
I mean, and the first ad, which you probably haven't seen,
Oh, I saw it.
is really a wonderful ad with the guy doing all the negative stuff and then saying, he finally says, oh, Paul, you're a pretty good guy. And Paul says, yeah, you're a good guy too, Jerry. Unfortunately, Jerry has his legal issues with, I don't know, you know, solicitation of a minor, whatever. That was an unforced error on the Davis campaign, not on Paul, but people in that campaign should have known that this guy had connections that were going to come out almost immediately. And he's done that, but there have only been one or two of those. If that's the worst one, and Davis handled it beautifully. The ad was gone. He apologized, but I hope they reshoot that ad because it's a great ad. Thank you very much.